Hello everyone, it's David from Automotive Press. As you know, I love doing car reviews, especially from my engineer's perspective, where I check for things like panel gaps, panel alignment, and paint quality, and then show you whether or not the car is well built. And in the past videos, I've also done some reviews and comparison of cars built in Japan versus those built in North America. And sometimes there are some differences. So ultimately, people have been asking me this very important question, which is if you were to compare cars built in North America versus cars built in Japan, are there any differences in terms of long-term reliability? Are cars built in Japan truly more reliable than those built in North America? And that's a very important question for many of us who want to keep our cars longer and longer. But at the same time, it's a bit of a controversial question because we automatically assume everything built in Japan is better, and that is not always the case, especially when it comes to cars that are built at the Toyota plant in Cambridge, Ontario, because that is one of the best factories in the world in terms of manufacturing quality and also long-term reliability. So today what I want to do is to demystify some of the thinking that we have in terms of comparing cars that are built in Canada versus cars that are built in Japan. In fact, I'm going to use this Lexus RX as an example because this one is built in Cambridge, Ontario at TMMC, which is Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada, but it's also built in Kyushu factory in Japan, and therefore it'll be a most ideal reference point from which I will explain why, in terms of long-term reliability, there are no differences between those cars that are built in places like TMMC versus those ones that are built in Japan. So let me give you 5 reasons why I believe this particular Lexus RX is just as well built and will be as reliable as those built in Japan. Let's go. Welcome back. So first, let me clarify to you exactly where the Lexus RX is built. This particular one is built at TMMC, which is Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada in Cambridge, Ontario. In that region, Toyota actually has 3 plants, all together in a similar area, north, west, and south. And this particular Lexus RX is built in the south plant. But also the RX is built globally in Japan, in Kyushu factory. And I have been to that factory a number of times as well, so I've seen similar models like the RX being built in Fukuoka, and I've also been to the Cambridge factory quite a few years ago. So having seen almost every single factory within the Toyota family, I have a pretty good feel for how they build cars, what kind of standard they use, and why their car seems to be so much more reliable than any other brand. Coming back to the RX for a moment, this is also a global product and sold in many parts of the world. So why do I believe that this particular RX, which is built in Canada, is as good as those made in Kyushu, Japan? Well, first of all, and the most important one, is the fact that all Toyota factories, including the Cambridge plant, but also the Kyushu plant, follow the same Toyota principle called the Toyota Way, and also implement what we call TPS, or Toyota Production System. The two work side by side in collaboration to create a standard that is unmatched by perhaps any other brands in the world. Toyota Way is the philosophy, the mindset, and thinking behind all things to do with how Toyota does business, and it is a glue that brings everything together and really focuses on the mindset, the culture, the thinking, and the philosophy behind making the best cars in the world. And that means Toyota Way really focuses on teamwork, collaboration, and continuous improvement, and every single person within Toyota family really believes in that and follows that because it is the most important principle. But there's also TPS, which is designed to create the optimum efficiency and operational excellence. However, it is also the standard and methodology behind what makes Toyota cars so reliable and such a high standard. So for example, things like a pokayoke, which is a Japanese word for mistake proofing, is one example of a method or a system used within Toyota to make sure that there are no mistakes that can be passed on to the next person. Another example is the Andon system, which is a signal that the production work will give if there's a problem they discover during the line, so they do not pass a problem or defect to the next working station or to the next operator. And those are some examples that make up the TPS or Toyota Production System, and that allows Toyota to produce cars with almost no defects. So to summarize, the first reason why I can attest to the fact that all Toyota cars, regardless of the origin of manufacturing, have high quality is they follow the same Toyota Way principle and the same TPS standard and guideline. The second reason why I believe this Lexus RX built in Canada is as good and as reliable as those built in Japan is the fact that the engineering principle engineering standard and product development process is the same for all Lexus RX regardless of where they're being built. So for example, this Lexus RX chief engineer is Mr. Ono or Ono-san, who were completely responsible for all product development process right up until the time that this car is built and coming off the assembly line. And he's held accountable regardless of where the Lexus RX is actually built in terms of regions. Now, Ono-san replaces the previous chief engineer, Katsuda-san, who were responsible for a number of different Lexus RX, but they all have the same vision and the same principle, which is to build the best engineered vehicle with the best quality. And even though the Lexus RX is a global product, which means a different engineering group might be involved from, let's say, US or from Japan or somewhere else, and it's also being built in a couple of different countries, they all must follow the exact same engineering standard and you follow the same principle and the same method. And that's why the long-term reliability and the long-term durability will be the same for all Lexus RX regardless of where they're built. Now, before I go too far into the video, I also wanted to let you know that I've included a video clip of the interview I did with Amit from Car Care Nut about a year ago in regard to this exact same topic, where we talked about the difference in reliability or quality between Japan-made cars and those made outside Japan. So that one is included in the back of this whole video, so stay tuned and please watch that one as well. The third reason why I'm confident this thing is as reliable as the one that's built in Kyushu, Japan, is the fact that it's built at TMMC, which is a Canadian factory in Cambridge, and that plant is an award-winning plant that has won multiple awards from J.D. Power. In fact, this year they won the plant award once again from J.D. Power, which makes it 21 times that they won the award. And the plant award is based on J.D. Power's IQS, which stands for Initial Quality Study, which looks at all of the cars, have a survey done by the actual owners, and report on the problems and or defects found. And based on that research and study, the TMMC won the Bronze Award from J.D. Power. So because TMMC is an award-winning plant in terms of producing high-quality cars, I have a lot of confidence that this thing is super well built. The fourth thing I want to point out is the fact that Cambridge plant in Ontario, Canada is the longest running Lexus factory outside Japan. In fact, TMMC was the very first plant to be awarded the Lexus production outside Japan many decades ago. So they have been running Lexus products for the longest time, even though nowadays Lexus are also being produced in Kentucky and now in Princeton, Indiana with the new Lexus TX. So of all the plants that are producing Lexus model, outside Japan at least, the Cambridge plant has the longest experience. And that will contribute to the fact that they have some of the Canadian-born Takumi people who can build Lexus well in a way that will last a very long time. By the way, I do want to point out that there are some differences in terms of panel gap and in terms of panel alignment between cars built in Japan and cars built outside. But that is primarily due to the fact that Japanese consumers are so finicky and so picky about how everything looks that sometimes they have to build it to a slightly different standard. It's nothing to do with the long-term reliability, but it does make a difference in terms of aesthetics. And when you measure the gaps like I always do, yes, I will notice some difference, maybe up to a millimeter, between Japan-built cars and those built somewhere else. The fifth and the last reason why I believe this Canadian-built Lexus RX will be reliable for many years to come is the fact that all Lexus RX, regardless of where it's being built, have gone through the same QRD testing. QRD stands for quality, reliability, and durability. And so even though some are built in Japan and some are built here in Cambridge, Ontario, they have gone through the same kind of winter testing, the summer testing, exposure to UV, exposure to wear and tear, and also extreme durability tests. They've all gone through the same standard for testing, and therefore in terms of long-term wear and tear and long-term durability, it should be identical regardless of where they are built. And of course, ultimately, the real test is the consumers who own these cars and drive for hundreds of thousands of miles. And then you look at the actual wear and tear, you look at the component failure after a number of decades, and you can decide on the field whether those built in Japan are any different from those built in North America. And based on my research and based on data from a variety of different sources, you can tell that North American built vehicles from Toyota family, especially the Canadian built factories, have been proven to be very reliable, even compared to some of the best cars from Japan. Some of my friends are still driving old Camrys and Corollas built in North America, and even though they might have reached 200 or 300,000 miles, they're still driving solid and without any major issues. And therefore, I truly believe that nowadays, because of the standardizations of the quality standard, the testing standard, as well as the fact that single chief engineer is responsible for the overall process for all product development when it comes to things like Lexus RX, there should no longer be any measurable difference in terms of long-term reliability between Japan-built cars and Canadian-built cars, much like what we're seeing in the new Lexus RX. And so that is my belief, and I know that this could be a bit of a controversial topic because I often compare the Japanese-built cars to Canadian or US-built cars, and I often point out the differences in terms of gap and alignment. So yes, I'm a little bit contradicting myself from that perspective, but just because there are slight difference in the gaps of the body panels, for example, or slight difference in paint quality, or even slight difference in texture of the materials inside, they do not necessarily reflect the long-term durability or reliability of that particular product, because those things have more to do with engineer standard, engineer testing, and product development and manufacturing quality. And that's why I made this video, because there's just too much myth surrounding those vehicles built in Japan versus those built in North America or elsewhere outside Japan. And I'm partly responsible for that because I keep showing the differences in terms of quality between Japan and North American built cars. But I also want to clarify that those things do not necessarily contribute to a difference in long-term reliability. So I hope this video was helpful for you and that you would feel a little bit more comfortable buying North American built vehicles if it's a Toyota brand or Lexus brand. For other brands, including other Japanese companies, I'm not sure if I can say the exact same thing. But for Toyota family of products, including Toyota models and Lexus models, I'm very confident that over 5, 10, maybe even 20 or 30 years, the reliability for Canadian-built cars and US-built cars will be just as good as those built in Japan. Let me know in the comments below what you think. I'm sure I will get a lot of comments on these particular videos, but I'm happy to answer them if I can. But until next video, I'm signing off for now. Thank you so much.
So, you've watched this video this long, we come to the moment of truth. Are Japanese-made Toyotas assembled or built better than elsewhere? Well, I'm going to actually direct that question to the expert in Toyota production system. David, what do you think?
That is a very interesting question. No, I have been to most of the factories, not just with Toyota, with other car companies as well. So I've been to almost all the factories in Japan, most of the factories in North America, and also a whole bunch of them in Europe. And I study them very carefully as that's part of my work that I do. So I can tell you first of all, in terms of mainstream Toyota products, not brand new models that just came out or brand new factory. If you just compare side by side, something similar like, let's say, a RAV4 built in Japan versus a RAV4 built in Woodstock, Ontario, there is very little difference because for a number of reasons. One, they meet the exact same standard. We call them a number of different things, but SOP, standard operating procedure, is identical. The workers are trained the same way. In fact, if there is a new model introduced in North America that was previously built in Japan, the workers have to go to Japan to study, and they will bring some of the Japanese senior managers back to the US or elsewhere to train and to mentor them. So there's lots of cross-functional training back and forth. So unless it's a brand new model in a brand new factory, unless that's a different story, if it's something that's being built in both countries like a RAV4, there's very little difference, almost. In fact, I would question whether you can find any difference in terms of defects, reliability, dependability. Now, I will say that there is subtle difference in not so much fit and finish, but more in terms of aesthetics. So, for example, we have, my wife now has 2021 RAV4 Prime. That Prime is built in Japan, but one of my other company car is a 2020 RAV4, which is built in Woodstock, and they're both the exact same color, the pearl white color. And if you look carefully, there is just a very subtle difference in terms of gloss and the way the paint was applied, but it's not a functional defect, and it has nothing to do with reliability or dependability. And same thing with the plastic injection molding parts you see inside the car. If you look really carefully with a trained eye, you can tell that the way the molding and the texture works, there's always a little bit of difference I noticed between the Japanese one and those built somewhere else. But again, it has nothing to do with reliability or the quality of the material. They're all same standard. But is there a minor difference? There is, but it doesn't add up to anything to do with defects, right? So they're both reliable. If you actually measure what we call the defects per million or defects per car, there's a number of different measurements that we do. It's typically almost identical within like 1% of each other among the Japanese built one versus, let's say, those one built in the US or Mexico. There's not more than 0.5% to 1% difference. And those differences are typically more aesthetics and again, not functional. But to answer that question, if you're looking at dependability, reliability, and basic fit and finish, you will not notice any difference between Japanese ones and others. And also, I know people have sometimes concern about factories in Mexico, just because people are maybe a little bit biased sometimes. They want Japan #1, they want North America built cars #2. They might put Mexico as a third option. But I've known a lot of people that work for factories in Mexico, and they actually tell me they have some of the best manufacturing practices and people are very diligent. I would again say that there is no difference between those built in Mexico and the US. I know people are very concerned about the Tacoma production moving from San Antonio, Texas to Mexico. I don't think you need to worry at all. It's a really well-built factory. And so, yeah, so those are some of my comments, Ahmed. I don't know if you agree or not, but over back to you.
Oh, David, I agree 100%. And I'll give you more of the fit and finish examples. And this is something I see and I know about, and it doesn't bother me one bit. I have bought multiple North American made Toyotas, and actually I am currently waiting, as the date of filming this video, for a North American model to be delivered to me. The fit and finish, let me define this to you as a consumer, how you would see this. If you look at the paint, not the paint quality, not that you're going to get patches that are not shiny and the thing is all over the place and the color don't match. That is not it. But we're talking about when you look at the paint with a very strong light that is designed to inspect paint, you might see a speck or two throughout the whole car. I've seen this. Again, you need a trained eye. You can't just be looking at the car under the sun after you washed it. That is not a way to check paint. But then you go at the panel gaps. Now, we're talking 0.5 millimeter difference. I can see this, David can see this. Many consumers won't even see this, won't even notice it. But again, if the hood, for example, the hood gaps on the sides, if this side has 0.5 millimeter bigger gap than this side because the hood is slightly sitting this way, well, that is not going to affect the car, especially after the first accident where all the gaps will be all over the place. Simple, honest truth, this is really it. You look at the dashes, there might be a 0.25 millimeter gap in one of the panels because of the injection molding and all this stuff. But you look at the engine is the same. The transmission is the same. The big ticket items, let's say, are the same. So I am not really convinced that you must buy a Japanese built car if you want this car to last 200,000–300,000 miles. I think that has more to do with your ownership and care of the car more than where it's made. And this plays a much bigger impact than where the car was made. And remember, we are buying Toyotas. Toyotas have some of the highest standards in the industry. Now, they might be not the most thrilling car to drive. People call them all kinds of things. But when it comes to reliability and durability, they are king. And that is as simple as that, is a purpose-built car for that purpose. And they do that very well. They're not going to compromise on their quality and their reputation just because they have a new factory. So the final verdict. You know, this is not my personal opinion. This is going to be my professional opinion. I work on these cars. I see them when they come in. I've dealt with the design issues. I've dealt with production issues, part supply issues, and I've reported it. We have an internal system, DPRs, dealership product reports. This gives Toyota kind of feedback from the ground so they can follow up. I have been to the Kentucky factory before, for example, that's the closest one here. I have seen those same DPRs that we make hung on the wall in the factory so they can implement changes. Now, one thing about this whole thing, Yes, there is a very subtle difference between fit and finish, mainly appearances, cosmetics, between Japanese assembled made Toyotas and North American or others. But I see what people have to go through to custom order that one model that is, let's say a RAV4, instead of getting one that is right off the lot, although that's not the case these days with the shortage, but normally people leave the 20 RAV4s on the lot and they custom order one. They have to wait for months and months and months to get that one made in Japan. But really that hassle, and potentially pay more for it, of course, that hassle is not worth it. For this tiny little difference that you are getting, it is not worth it. Would I buy a Japanese made car that I could have otherwise bought a North American? I would not. That is, now we're moving into my personal opinion. I've owned many North American Toyotas and I didn't think twice when buying it. Where the car is made shouldn't be a factor in your purchase, honestly. What should be a factor in your purchase is who you are buying it from, Toyota, others. And the most important thing about your car ownership experience is you and the maintenance. People will focus so much on buying this Japanese made car and then they go on to neglect it. And then when it have serious issues at 5 to 10 years, they start complaining about the whole brand and they say it was all for nothing. No, you need to maintain your car. Some people have this mentality of just because it's a Toyota, I can neglect it and it'll be okay because it's quality. That is not the case. Please take care of your Toyotas and then it doesn't matter where they're made, they're still a Toyota. Well, David, what are your final verdict or closing thoughts on this?
Right. Well, put it this way, I own a 2021 Tacoma TRD Pro, which is built in San Antonio, Texas. That's my daily driver. And my sort of fun car I have is a Toyota Supra, which, as you know, is built in Austria by a Canadian supplier, a Canadian company called Magna, but it's mostly BMW components, right? So I'm the person who should be most picky about the type of car I should buy, and neither of my cars are built in Japan. So that's one indication that I'm not concerned about buying cars that are not built in Japan, and it will not come into my decision-making process where it's made. I will say that what's more important, as you mentioned before, Ahmed, is how new the product is and whether the factory is new. So you, typically speaking, you don't want to buy from a brand new factory just because the workers are still being trained and while you have a senior management looking over everything, you could still have some issues. So that I would say it could be a potential concern. You also want to avoid buying the car in the very first 6 months of the product life cycle. Usually after 6 months, a lot of issues have been taken care of and it's quite safe, especially for Toyota. So I will say those two things. But in terms of comparing different countries of origin, because the supply chain is all mixed up and you don't know, for example, if you buy a product made in Japan, where the components actually come from, and vice versa. If you buy a car or a truck that's built in North America, well, the components could come from anywhere. And because it's so hard to determine anyway, this mix and match approach makes it irrelevant where it's really made. Also because they all meet the same standard Toyota has. And the standard is applied not just to their manufacturing, but to their supplier, tier 1 supplier, which is a major component, and even to tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, which are smaller suppliers. That standard carries all the way through the supply chain. So it doesn't matter where it's built or what model it is. If it's a Toyota or Lexus product, you know for sure that it's going to meet all that high standard, high caliber of standard. So I'm not concerned about where it's made, and neither should the general consumers. They shouldn't make decisions based on that, other than those few things we talked about earlier. So if you look at, of course, the final examination or final audit comes in the form of different surveys, right? Whether it's a consumer report or other companies that are doing some kind of audit. And while they're not super accurate, you can see that all the Toyota products or Lexus product has in the top 5%. So again, it didn't matter if they were built in San Antonio or they were built in Kyushu factory in Japan. They are in the top 3 to 4% or 5% of the quality standards. So it's all safe, it's all good. Choose the car you want, buy the car you want, and don't worry too much about where it's built. That's sort of my last advice.
Thank you so much, David. Well, folks, you have the truth from two relevant people in this. I am not just saying this because it's the fashion or the trend. This is the God honest truth from our professional opinion, from actual real world experience. I would like to give a huge shout out to David. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today. Guys, make sure that you check out his channel, Automotive Press, on YouTube. David is a great friend and a brilliant engineer, and I'm so honored and humbled to have to know you and have you on the channel. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Honor is all mine. Ahmed, I just love your channel. I love all the things that you're doing. And we both have the same passion for cars and trucks and all things to do with Toyota. So thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here.
Thank you, David.